Hello and welcome to Creation Research Unplugged for this archaeology episode special. I'm Indiana Joe and today we've come to Old Oswestry Hill Fort in its wonderful splendour, and it's really amazing if you can get up above it and look down on it exactly what an incredible feat it is. Now you see, we've come here for quite an important reason. Our entire topic for this special episode is all about archaeology, specifically about biblical archaeology. Now that's quite important to make sure that we understand what we mean by biblical archaeology, because it's not archaeology of the Bible. That's been covered many times, and yes, archaeology of the Bible, archaeology of Bible people, archaeology of Bible times, archaeology of Bible lands will certainly come into it, but we're actually exploring the entire world of archaeology, history of mankind on planet Earth, anthropology from a biblical perspective. So while Bible lands will come into it, well, this hill fort was built by the Celts when they occupied most of Britain many hundreds of years ago. We're going to explore how do we look at that in a biblical interpretation. How do we take stone tools from a biblical interpretation? How do we look at the wonderful world around us? Because it's really important. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, everything was very good. Yet we look around us today and everything's not good. There's thorns, there's thistles, there's death, there's disease. Hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic at the moment. Something has changed, and that has affected mankind in an enormous way. And we need to have a correct interpretation of the world around us, a biblical interpretation of the world around us, in order to understand the position that we're in. What happened in the past, man's sin, is the key to why we're in the state we are in today. And biblical archaeology is a really important part of understanding the history of mankind on the earth. So join me, Indiana Joe, join our team of experts from around the globe as we delve into biblical archaeology in this special episode of Creation Research Unplugged. Now we're in a really good spot right now at Old Oswestry Hill Fort, which you can actually begin to see how this was designed and built. You see, behind me up there was where the settlement was, where the houses and the farmers and people would be staying. And right down here where I've just come into, this is one of the pits of the ramparts. You see, as you saw, you had a big steep hill coming down and then going back up, which makes, well, rather than just one steep hill, it makes it harder for an attacking enemy because they've got to go up and down and up, and it's a really good way of designing your hill fort in order to make it safe and protective. Now you see, the Celts themselves are an interesting people group. Many people used to think that they were invaders from Europe that came over and started attacking and killing and taking over the people from the Bronze period. But the reality seems to now be, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Celts actually originated here. Tower of Babel, Noah's flood. Noah and his family came off, started to populate the earth, but they disobeyed God's command to spread out and populate. They stayed together and decided to build a tower to heaven. After they did that, of course, God muddled up the languages and the people group spread over the earth. And it would appear that one of the people groups that left the Tower of Babel came directly here to the UK, started to populate it, became the Celtic nation, and they spread out throughout Europe, even nearly coming close to destroying the Roman army. Wow, quite interesting. And how exactly did they nearly destroy the Roman army? Well, we have some artifacts here. Have a look at this. Hey, that's a nasty spearhead. Imagine that going into you. But you notice what's interesting? If you look at the bottom here, there's actually nothing to hold it onto the staff. You see, this was deliberate because you would file your staff to a point, fit this into your staff, and then when you stabbed someone, the staff would come out and your large spearhead would be stuck in a person. And what it would mean is, not only could the person pull it out and throw it away and try and heal himself, this would be stuck in him, but also one of your enemies could pull your spear out and go and start attacking you with it. That makes a very effective weapon, a very nasty weapon that was designed to kill. You remember the result of the curse when Adam willingly chose to disobey God, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The world was cursed. And the promise which God gave to Adam before the earth was cursed was, if you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Now the earth is cursed, and because of that, people kill each other. Whether it's for money, for safety, for security, for fame, for fortune, for power, the result is the earth is quite a nasty place. And the very fact that we have a hill fort here when, hey, look at some of the sizes of these defences, it's absolutely enormous, and it's been strategically built specifically to stop invading armies, specifically to keep the people of the town safe, and specifically to give the people of the town an advantage point so they can rain these things and slingshots and stones and arrows and all sorts of nastiness down on an invading army. It's no longer a nice place to live. But it's little things like this which really make history come alive. You can touch it and feel it and see that, hey, this is something that's not only been crafted here, it's something that's been used. It's something that's been used in the past for a purpose, by a person. All of a sudden the world of archaeology comes alive to you, and you can realise exactly how important our history is. So, in our first ever clip, we're going to dive into history, and specifically, what did people used to believe about the age of the earth, even far back as the Anglo-Saxons? Oh, we've got a very important person, a very important character to go and meet in today's What's in a Word.
G'day again from the Creation Guy Down Under, and this week we have a little puzzle for you. Who am I? I knew about St. George, but that was before he was English. I knew about Christ, but I knew nothing about Christmas. I'm well known because I wrote a lot, but most of you don't know me because I wrote in Latin. But if it wasn't for me, the English would know nothing of themselves or about their real history. Oh, and by the way, I wore a big brown cloak. Got any ideas yet? Who am I? Well, listen carefully to this passage that I wrote about the first book in the Bible, Genesis, if you really want to understand English.
Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. There was evening and morning one day. And there was evening, with the light gradually setting after the completed period of the length of the day and passing beneath the lower parts of the world, which now happens at night with the familiar circuit of the sun. And there was morning, with the same light gradually returning above the earth and beginning another day. At this point, one day was completed, without doubt a day of 24 hours.
What did you guess? It was the Venerable Bede. His mum and dad dropped him off at the monastery when he was 7 years old, and he spent the rest of his life becoming the historian of historians about the whole of England. He would gather material from all sorts of places and put it together in a well-measured story that was easy to remember. He gave Britain a real history. And yes, he did believe Genesis was real history too, and the days were 24 hours. Oh, stop. Why 24? Do you realise one of the things we've discovered about ancient numbers is they tended to be natural? I mean, 12 hours in the morning, 12 in the evening, a total of 24. Where is that a natural figure, a natural number? Some of you know that we have feet. I mean, they're quite natural. And some of you, if you live in Britain or the USA, still use 12 inches in a foot. There's 12. But what's an inch? The answer? There. The distance across my thumb. Where does that get to 12? You watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Do you realise you can use your thumb to touch all 12 bits of your fingers? Or 2 12s is 24. These are natural numbers. Bede believed that God used the natural time system, the ordinary 24-hour day, and it was real history. Well, Bede passed on in 735 AD, and you can catch up with him if you like, because he's buried in Durham Cathedral in the Galilee Chapel. But you can catch up with him personally because Bede was a Christian. And if you want to see him one day face to face, then you need to know Jesus Christ, his Lord and Creator, and you need to ask him to be yours. I'm the Creation Guy, John Mackay. See you next time.
Now we've come up here to the top of the hill fort, and you can see this great big flat area behind me. This is where the people would be living. They've been protected by the ramparts, they've been protected by the fence that would also go around the ramparts. They're ready to rain down fire and brimstone and axes and hammers and spears and swords and everything down on any invading people. Of course, the biggest invasion would eventually come from the Romans when they invaded the UK, when they invaded the Celtic tribe, and they eventually overthrew them, whether it was by force or whether it was by bargaining or negotiation. But during the peacetime, this is where the people would live. This is where the people would worship. Yes, the Celts had a very intensive form of worship where they believed that the spirits were all around them, and the spirits were in all things natural, whether it was the river or the lake or the stream or the trees or the flowers. They believed that there were spirits, they believed that there were gods, and you needed to appease them, you needed to worship them. But then don't be surprised, when God made us, he made us in his image, an image which was built to worship, an image that was built to love, and an image that was built to glorify God, glorify, worship and love God. Ever since then, even though we've been fallen, even though we've fallen away from our true worship, or our supposed true worship to Christ, we're actually been worshipping idols, false gods. That's why one of the first of the 10 Commandments, or the first 2 of the 10 Commandments, was, you shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make a graven idol, a graven image of me in order to worship. But unfortunately, cultures throughout the world have been doing this. Everything from the Celts to, hey, even the ancient Egyptians. We've got a wonderful, bronze figurine of Horus, one of the Egyptian gods that they worshipped. This has been all down throughout history. So join us as we continue to explore archaeology in our normal archaeology segment, I suppose you'd call it. We're going with Caleb once again. We're delving into the world of the Maya, the South Americans. We're looking at how vicious and horrible and ruthless they were, and exploring a little bit about their culture and a lot about their godlessness.
Hello and welcome back to Biblical Archaeology. Today we're going to be looking at the civilization of the Ancient Maya. Now the Ancient Maya were very civilized. They had some incredible ways of building. You may have heard of Chichen Itza, Palenque. That was also an incredibly sophisticated city. They built observatories to observe the stars. They observed the patterns of the stars. They wrote them down in huge kind of like books that were made of tree bark. These were called codices. They wrote these all down. They had an incredibly sophisticated language system depicting little pictures, square pictures, very civilized people. But unfortunately, they had no morals. And it was this reason that when they believed that their gods wished for blood to keep their civilization up and running, that they appeased the gods with blood. And sadly, it was all wasted because, of course, their gods were not real. But let's have a look at some of these. These are some figurines that the Maya had. Here we go, here's one. This is an absolutely fantastic. This is a slightly earlier version from the Maya, from a people group called the Toltecs, and they advanced later on and moved into being called the Maya as their civilization advanced. Just look at that, absolutely lovely. Here we have another one, very similar. Just look at the detail on that, absolutely fantastic. These would have been little house shrine gods, so they'd have been crafted by the craftsmen who lived in the village, and then sold on as little, more like sacred images for people to keep in their house, which they believed would keep their house safe from the various, well, robbers or maybe dangerous animals that lived about, or even just like illnesses and destruction and stuff. This one is our most complex one. It's absolutely amazing. You can see all these little details. It's made from lots and lots of different pieces of clay. It's not moulded from just one piece, and they've been stuck together. Just look at the expression on that face. That's a very Mayan expression. If you see lots of statues from the Maya, you'll see this similar expression. The big wide eyes. You'll see these also in their system writing called glyphs. They called their writing glyphs. A bit like hieroglyphs, but hieroglyphs is Egyptian, so they were called glyphs. And of course we have this one. that Joseph mentioned earlier. The whistle, absolutely amazing. And of course, yes, they were fascinated by music, absolutely brilliant. They've got the little hole coming out here, the air would pass through and be separated by the hole, making the sharp whistle sound. Again, look at the expression on that little chap's face. Absolutely amazing. This could have been a children's toy. We don't know. It could have been a children's toy. It could have been for musical instruments that they'd have used in ceremonies. But absolutely lovely. Just look at that. So we can see just from these little figurines and from the knowledge of their pyramids, of the knowledge of their codices, the way that they patterned out the movement of the stars, we can see that the Maya were incredibly intelligent people. They were very civilized, they were clever. Join me next time as we explore more about the Maya.
You know, sometimes you have to go crawling through the undergrowth to get to where you want to get to in these archaeological sites, but we've reached the top of the hill fort and we're going to explore tools. Because yes, tools are an important part about how and what makes us human. Because you see, we've been using tools, well, ever since God created us. And yes, monkeys can make very simple tools, but do you think a monkey could make a chainsaw? Well, I certainly hope not, but what is the difference between the tools that monkeys make and the tools that we make? And what is our history of making tools? Now, we've had a special question come through, which we're going to be answering after this next clip, but first, let's head over to Australia. Let's go visit Jurassic Ark, let's go meet our international director, John Mackay, once again, as he talks about some Australian tools and what it actually means to make us human.
I was in the outback down under one year. This is me, the creation guy, John Mackay, and I stopped for a break. It was a hot day and there was a stream like this, but just as dry and full of rocks. And I looked down and I spotted a stone. This one, my first ever stone axe. I don't know if you've ever tried to make one. This one is designed to be held in your right hand. Pretty sophisticated. And I got to know the old Aboriginal elders, and I was asking about their tools, and they said, we left the middle of the world after much war and fighting, and we brought metal tools with us. But when we got here, we found the spirits up in the hills, and we began to worship them, and we forgot how to make metal. Now they are regarded as Stone Age, but they didn't start out that way. Of course, they are actually famous for tools like this. See the boomerangs? Oh, this is the one you're more familiar with. This is the returning boomerang. But this one here, that's the killing boomerang. These were made specially for us in Creation Research by the Warlpiri people west of Ayers Rock, or Uluru, as is more politically correctly known. You know something? They don't call this a killing boomerang. They call it Kali. Kali, the goddess of death from India. Do you know something? All the evidence, stone tools, boomerangs, returning boomerangs, Kali, point to the fact that they actually left the Middle East. They left the Tower of Babel, just like everybody else. The one family of man, no matter how many races you have, the Bible is true from the beginning. We all left the Tower of Babel. It's the creation guy, John Mackay. See you next time.
Well, it's time for a Q&A. You see, over the last few episodes, we've been trying to add these little Q&A sessions in, and we had a really good question last week about coronavirus and DNA and RNA and how it all fits in, but this time the question for this week fits in really well with our topic of history and archaeology, specifically about tools. Now, I've already gone and seen John, we've already seen some stuff about Australian tools, but what's the history of tools? How do we know that you can design tools if you don't have any tools to make your tools in the first place? And what is a history of tools on the planet? How they are made, how they used to be made, and how do we get to our wonderful great big machinery that we have today? Ah, interesting. So join me as we go and have a look at some real artifacts, we have a look at some real tools, and we ask that question, how do you make a tool, what makes a tool, and what is the history of tools? A wonderful big long subject, but with plenty of artifacts in our Genesis Museum of Creation Research that we can delve into and explore. Hello and welcome to our Q&A session for Creation Research Unplugged. We've got a wonderful question this week from Nathaniel, and he says this. He'd like to ask how tools have been made over history. He's trying to understand how a tool could be made without the aid of another tool. And it's very important because you have to understand the evolutionary assumptions that go into making tools says that you started down there and humankind built itself up, evolving, getting more intelligent, getting more hands-on over millions of years from the ape-like creatures to the humans we are today. An evolutionary assumption says we are continuing to evolve, we are continuing to get better, we're continuing to get more electricity. I mean, the Stone Age people, they had stones. Today we have computers. Surely we must be more intelligent than the people with stones. And how did they actually start to craft these stones in the first place? You see, when you look down through history and you look through wonderful tools like we've used this tool earlier on in the episode, hey, that's a nasty looking spearhead. Or if you want to go to the Roman period, the group of people who actually ended up overthrowing the Celts, they had great big swords like this, the gladius, which they would use for stabbing. A wonderful piece of technology, a very wonderful tool, but one that was designed for death. One that was designed to kill. And it's not just the sort of weapons and the tools that were used to attack and kill and slash. Some were practical, like this wonderful little Celtic pestle and mortar. Hey, it's made out of iron, it's got its... You can see how it would have ground it together. Lovely stuff. Practical tools, and also tools made for violence. How were they made over the years? Well, let's delve in and find out a bit of history about these tools. Now, the first thing we have to ask is, what is a tool? And how would you make a stone tool, especially if you don't have any tools to begin with? Well, I was having a little scurringe around underneath the hedge and I found this rock. Okay, it's a rock. It's been produced by an explosion, it's been broken up, it's had no design in it whatsoever. What is design? Well, you see, design is when you have an object that has got properties that do not come from the original material. In other words, rocks don't... Well, have a look at this stunning hand axe we have down here. I will talk about this in a minute, but can you see how it's been smoothed and shaped into a sharp point? A sharp point that's equal on both sides, a sharp point that's perfect to be used as an axe. Ah, you see, rocks don't do this by themselves. Here we have something which has properties, the nice sharp edge, that do not come from the original material, that's the rock, therefore this has been designed. But this rock has not been designed in the slightest, it's just a rock. But can you see it has a sharp edge? Ah, when it got hit or broken or exploded, it left a sharp edge, and you know what, we could use that sharp edge. Here's a stick, and we could use this sharp edge, and we could start to... Hey, look, we're using it like an axe. We're scraping off the bark, we are using that sharp edge to cut into the wood. Hey, we've made ourselves a tool. Even though we didn't take this rock, even though we didn't bash it and shape it, what we've done is imply intelligence to the rock. We've done something which... well, on a very basic level, some animals can do. You can put cognitive thinking skills towards something that you find lying around, and you can use it for a purpose. You have used intelligence to make a tool, basically out of nothing, just a stone that you find lying around. But is that the same as crafting a tool? Well, not quite, because if you actually have a look at some more practical examples, come down here for instance, this is a very rough stone tool, but even here you can see how it's been shaped. You can see how they've got stones and got bits of wood or got bits of antlers and they've bashed it, they've shaped it into the stone tool that you see today. Now these are very rough examples, but you can get into some finer examples. A very nice example how you can see, well, can you see that little curvature? You see, what has happened is a person who has been crafting this has come with a big heavy rock or a stick or a piece of antler and he's hit there. And in hitting there, the whole bit has flaked off, leaving a nice sharp edge. Now this takes a lot of skill, it takes a lot of time, but given enough time and given enough practice, you can craft some really wonderful and intricate tools straight out of rocks. Now there are some stones which are particularly good at making tools at, especially if you can find, well, sometimes you want to go down on the beach and find a nice smooth stone. That could be perfect for bashing another stone and beginning to flake part off of it. Or, you know, deer antler? Hey, that's really, really tough. That could be used for bashing stuff as well. Ah, okay. Now, a very good stone to use is actually flint. Now, these are some real flint cores that we know have been used. These were found at Chute Causeway, and they're called flint cores. get in nice and close and you can actually see where they've been struck. You need little teeny tiny flakes to make little scrapers and little knives, and they would have used a big chunk of flint like this. They'd have got their sort of antler or bit of stone, and by hitting it straight down really hard, they'd have begun to flake bits off. Little tiny super sharp bits that would always remain sharp. You don't need to sharpen flint because, hey, it doesn't chip. It doesn't sort of begin to blunt like an iron knife. It's actually extremely sharp. It's particularly good for cutting through meat. So these are real cores that were used, and you can see how they've begun to shave bits off. And they could have been used for all sorts of manner of things. And that's not just the only way that you can actually make tools out of stones. There's a big example over here. If you want to get in nice and close and have a look, can you see this big flat plate? You see, this is classed as Neolithic. Neolithic, the new stone times. The people who are beginning to use stones in a slightly different way. And it's a big flat disc. This is a quernstone, but not one of those big quernstones that you've seen in the medieval period. This would have used a flat stone like this. You pour your grain in there and you begin to grind your corn, or grind your wheat, or grind your grain into a powder. You see, this has been taken a big heavy stone and it's been scraped. Just by the continual rubbing action, you've ended up producing a quernstone. Very clever. Okay, so that's how you can make some different stone tools, and we'll show you one last little example. These are actually Neanderthal tools. Oh, you've heard of Neanderthal? Well, don't be surprised. He was a human being, because all humans were created in the image of God. All humans go back to Adam. There was no such thing as an ape man, and Neanderthals were just a human being with a very big brain. And they came from the Neander Valley. That's what they're named after. But if you have a look at some of these tools, you get in nice and close, you can see a wonderful chipped edge. You see, what you'd have done is got a little stone or a little bit of antler, and you'd have pressed it against your hand, and in doing so you'd flake off tiny little bits to a sharp serrated knife edge, a knife edge that's still sharp today and can still be used for cutting things. Now, there's obviously quite a big difference between making a simpler stone tool like this and making a great big medieval Viking sword like this. Hey, this takes a huge amount of craftsmanship, but you can kind of see the successive build-up into these much larger swords. But there's something that you need to be careful of. The idea of evolution says we started down there and we built our way up. The Bible says no, that was completely different. We started up there. We were created perfectly in the image of God, and we've been going downhill ever since. And the Bible also says that not long after Adam was created, people like Jubal, Cain and Tubal were making things out of bronze and iron. They were making tents. They were making musical instruments. That's a far-fetched picture from the old caveman idea. So what ended up causing people to go into caves, because yes, they certainly did live in caves, and making stone tools? The answer? The Tower of Babel. Oh, you remember Noah's flood? The flood that was a judgment on mankind. Only 8 people survived, and then those 8 people came off of the ark. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, and God told them to be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth. The trouble was, their descendants didn't do that. They said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to stay here, and we're going to build a tower to the heaven to prove that we are just as big and just as great as God. Of course, it's never a good idea. God confused their language, and he sent them out across the whole of the country. Now, let me ask you a question. If you had suddenly had to experience a huge, great big catastrophe, which meant that all of a sudden you had no electricity, all of a sudden you had no house, all of a sudden you had no tools, you had no car, and you were stuck in a cave by yourself and you could not communicate with anybody else, would you be able to survive? You'd probably struggle. But does that make you any less intelligent than you were before? No, it just means that you do not have the skills available to be able to continue forward and producing the same things we have today. It's the same for the Tower of Babel. The people who spread out over the world, some of them didn't have the technology to just suddenly build yourself a big sword. And it takes a lot of time to build a sword. It takes a lot of materials to build a sword. You need to mine the metal. You need to build the kiln. You need to get all the smelting and all the... Hey, it's a lot of work. But do you know what you need to make a stone tool? Well, sometimes you can simply just pick up a sharp rock and there you have yourself a tool. Apply it intelligently to the world around you and you've got a tool. But if you get the right material and you begin to shape it and bash it with things you find lying around, you can build up the skills to make very useful and very, very practical stone tools. But we see as man began to dominate the earth, man began to repopulate the earth after the flood, all of a sudden you can see that as you began to get cities and towns settled in one area, there was enough technology and there was enough material and enough money available to be able to continue forward to build tools like these swords. Things like, during the Celtic times, these wonderful spearheads, the pestle and mortar that goes into producing the wonderful food and culinary stuff that we find like pottage. Hey, we've got to deal with that. Or this. Hey, this is a nice little axe head, and you can see how it's sort of slightly similar to this stone one. The only difference is this is made out of bronze. This is a Bronze Age axe head, and it's sharp. Well, it's come to a point, but it's not really sharp anymore. You see, this is a downside of the metal stuff. You have to continually sharpen it, but when it is sharpened, it is much sharper and much stronger than these stone tools. You can begin to see some practicality going on here. Even all the way down to, well, we have one particularly very special. This is a real artifact, by the way. This is just a reconstruction. It's a modern reconstruction. It's an exact reconstruction, and it gives you a good idea of how these swords were. But this is the real deal. This is a Viking Axe Head. It's made out of iron and it's all very rusty, so we sort of keep it in dry conditions and it won't degrade anymore. But if you want to get an idea of how it looked like in real life, we have a full-size bearded axe here. Hey, look at that. You can begin to see the same kind of shape as it goes on. This is a big one. This would have been a slightly smaller hand axe, but it's a real deal. And you see, in order to make an axe like this, you need iron, which means you need iron ore, which means you need to go collecting in bogs, or you need to go digging down into the caves to get the iron. You need to smash it up, you need to begin to smelt it, you need to continually develop it and melt it down and remelt it. It takes a lot of work. So you have to understand, in order to get a stone tool, well, you just need a stone. It's much easier to make this, it's much harder to work to make this. No wonder people used this for so long as they were repopulating the earth. But then as technology began to develop and move on, you ended up with iron tools, you ended up with bronze tools, and then all the way down to the tools that we see today. Great big swords. A successive build on, but you know what? There are still cultures and people today who still use stone tools. Yes, if you go to Oceania and Papua New Guinea and places like that, they're still using these. They're still using them as ploughs. They're still using them as axes. Does it make them any less intelligent? No, it just makes them using the materials that they have around them rather than the 21st century technology that we have here. Oh, and don't be surprised, I mentioned Neanderthal man earlier. Well, Neanderthal man actually had a brain mental capacity 600 cubic centimetres larger than modern humans. No, we didn't invent the computer because we were more intelligent than Neanderthal man. We invented the computer because our internal computers couldn't actually cope with the processing information anymore. Neanderthal man could. We can't. Which is why we ended up relying on this technology, because we are less intelligent than they were in the past. And everything we see, both from archaeology and from anthropology, the history of mankind and the skeletons that we find, backs that up. History of tools, stone to metal, well, in the beginning, when everything was very good, when mankind fell, when mankind began to repopulate the world after Adam's sin, we know that they were making things like swords and stone and metal tools. It's just been a result of man's sin and a result of God's judgment that people had to go back to square one after the flood and after the Tower of Babel and go back to stone tools. Well, thank you for the question. I hope that's answered it somewhat. It's an enormous subject. In fact, we're going to go back onto this subject next week as we begin to look a bit deeper into the history of stone tools and how you actually make these stone tools in the beginning, and a bit more into the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and how it all ties up with the Bible. But for now, remember, you can trust the Word of God from the very beginning. Everything we see in God's world corresponds perfectly with what we read in God's Word. So thank you very much for asking the question. Join us next week as we continue on with it. Well, it's a stunningly beautiful day, and it's come to the time, as it always does in our episodes, to do our creation special. But today, Well, we're not actually doing grass, we're not doing the ferns, we're not doing anything that's outside, we're actually heading to the kitchen. Because today's creation special is slightly unusual. We're talking all about peas. Peas? Oh, you've heard of peas pudding and things like pottage? Ah, you see, peas were a very important part of the plant diet for the Celts, and we're in a hill fort today, and we know that they ate a lot of these plants. So come with me as we head back to the kitchen and we begin to explore the world of peas, pottage, peas pudding, and everything else in between. Okay, so we've come back to the kitchen, and today, for our creation special, we're talking about a particular plant which has been well known throughout history, has got fantastic vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin C in it, is brilliantly good for the soil, and has been used since the Celtic times. What is it? It's this plant here, the pea. Oh, these are yellow split peas, that's what they look like when they dry out. They're hard, and hey, if you want to eat them, you're going to need to add some water. But don't worry, we've got some pre-made stuff here, which you may even recognise the name, but you may not have quite made the connection before. What's that? Ah, peas pudding. Yes, for our international viewers, this is a very well-known food type in the UK, and again, it does go all the way back through to the Celts. The peas pudding, there's even a nursery rhyme about peas pudding hot, peas pudding cold, peas pudding in a pot 9 days old. Ah, well, you may think that that sounds disgusting, but you need to learn a little bit about the history. Ah. There we go, it's out. You see, this is actually peas pudding. What it is it's these yellow split peas which have been soaked overnight, boiled, and then sort of mushed up into this lovely, well, okay, it doesn't look too appetising at the moment, I agree, but it's this wonderful split peas pudding. And this is the basis for a lot of meals. You see, we have found bogmen. What are bogmen? Well, they are people from the Celtic times that some of them were sacrificed, some of them died naturally, and they got thrown in the bogs. And because the bogs are a sterile environment and they trap away any oxygen, which means the bacteria can't decompose them, then these bogmen just lay there. And it means when you find them and dig them up, they've still got all their skin, their flesh, their hair, everything there, including the contents of their stomach. And what's in their stomach? Peas pudding. This stuff. Ah, fantastic. Now, peas are a really useful plant, not just because they produce wonderful food, whether we're used to having them as the green fresh stuff that we boil on the stove, or you can dry them out and turn them into sort of pottage, which is now used all around the world, even in Asia where it's known as chana dal. It's the same kind of thing. Okay, peas as a plant. Well, when peas grow, they do something fantastic, which all plants do to a certain degree, but peas do it particularly well. What they do is they collect nitrogen from the air. They take it into the leaves, they take it down to their stems, and they produce little nitrogen balls on their roots. These, when the plant dies, decompose, rot back into the soil, and adds nitrogen to the soil. It's a really, really good way of sort of topping up your soil's ability to have nutrients in it and to feed its plants. You grow your peas. You have a rest year, grow your peas, churn it back into the soil. Fantastic, as well as producing a really nice, very, very healthy meal. Now, peas are really good for the soil, really good for gardening, and really good for you. See, this has formed the basis of, well, peas pudding in a pot 9 days old? Well, you wouldn't be surprised if you did get some peas pudding that was 9 days old. You see, this stuff would form the basis of a big stew. And on the Celtic times, all the way down through the medieval times, you'd have a big pot sitting over the stove. Big pot sitting on the fire. And what you would do, you would chuck in your split peas, you'd chuck in some carrots, you'd chuck in some beetroots or some of your root vegetables, you'd throw in a little bit of meat and some ham if you had it, and it would sit there and it would bubble. And every day you would add more and more and more to it. But every day you would take ladlefuls out of it and eat it, and it would sit there year round. So when you went to go and get yourself some of this stew, some of this peas pudding, some of this pottage, it was sort of a bit of a gamble as to whether you were going to get a piece of carrot that was 9 days old, 3 months old, or had been in there for 5 minutes. Okay, this pot would continue to go on and on and on all through the year, and this was its basis. Healthy stuff, really good stuff, and you can still get it today. Why don't you try making your own peas pudding, making some of your own pottage with the yellow split peas? It really is very good for you. You can see everything in the world around us, no matter how fallen by or cursed by sin it is, was originally created for God's glory to bless us. Remember that thing in the Bible? Every fruit of the tree all around you was good to eat, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And peas are a wonderful example of that. Created, fantastic for the soil, great for growing, and very, very good for you, and has been used as the basis of food for well over 3,000 years. Now, this idea of biblical archaeology being apart from archaeology of the Bible is a fairly revolutionary idea, even though it's a fairly simple one. You see, book after book after book after book has been produced about the archaeology of the Bible lands, the Bible times and the Bible peoples, but very rarely do you get something about whole archaeology in a biblical light. But that's when we have our resident historian, Dr. John Osgood, to the rescue. And he started a series about the Stone Age, the time of the kings in Israel, the times of Abraham and the Philistines, the whole area around there, Egypt and everything else in between, covering much more than just the Holy Land, but the additional regions around it, and even going back as far as the Stone Age. Fascinating stuff. And how does it fit in with the Bible? Well, we have the first two of these available. There are more coming later on as the publications get produced, but we have our two to start here by Dr. John Osgood. We have Egypt, Israel and the Exodus, and the times of Abraham and the Philistines. Little booklets, but go into fabulous detail about the area, fabulous detail about things like timelines. How does it all fit in the Bible? How can you correspond the incredibly long Egyptian timeline and what we read in the God's Word? Which one is true? How should we interpret it? And what is the real archaeological evidence to go along with it? Egypt, Israel and the Exodus, the times of Abraham and the Philistines, really important, really a must-read book, and available if you go to www.creationresearch.net. You'll find links to our UK shop, our Australian shop, our USA shop, where you can get these fantastic resources all for yourself. Well, there we are. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Creation Research Unplugged. As always, I hope that it's been thought-provoking, I hope that it's been challenging, and I hope you've learnt a lot of stuff, particularly about the importance of the history, culture, and understanding of the human's occupation on Earth ever since the beginning. Because it's really important to make sure you have that biblical point of view in order to understand, well, not just mankind on the planet, but also the history of the Bible and how it fits into human history and how it fits into the human occupation ever since the world began. It's really important to make sure that you actually get that straight in your mind and see how everything you see around us, even Celtic hill forts, and how they fit into the Bible from a full biblical perspective. Well, I hope you've enjoyed it, and as always, if you'd like to give us feedback, you can contact us at info@creationresearchuk.com. Remember our Q&A session. We've been wonderfully delighted to have 2 questions come in. Please carry on sending them in. We want to continue these episodes for at least a few more, so please do carry on sending your episodes in and we'll be able to get those questions. info@creationresearchuk.com. If you want to find out more about the ministry, go to www.creationresearch.net and you'll find links to our UK shops and our research and all the wonderful stuff that we're doing all over the planet. And make sure you like this video, make sure you follow us, make sure you hit the bell so that we're able to get notifications as to when we put new stuff up. Head over to our Facebook page, find out more about the daily stuff we're putting out there, and continue to support us. Thank you very much. Goodbye. God bless. We will see you very soon.